They had never seen anything like it. A massive Brahman bull, 1,700 pounds of muscle and fury, stood protectively over a wounded Burmese python nearly 20 feet long. The snake's scales glistened with blood where bark had torn them away, yet the bull, Thunder, they called him, wouldn't let anyone approach. Not even Mason Barrett, the ranger who'd raised him since Lucy passed. "Sir, protocol says we eliminate the invasive species," Deputy Jenkins insisted, rifle at the ready. Mason's weathered hand pushed the barrel down. "Not today." From his porch, old Jackson Whitley watched through rheumy eyes that had seen 80 Texas summers come and go. When the younger men turned to him for guidance, he simply shook his head. "Some things in nature ain't meant to be understood," Jackson drawled. "Only witnessed." Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 years earlier, Thunder had arrived at Whitley Ranch in a steel transport cage, his massive silver-white frame heaving with exhaustion and rage. The magnificent Brahman bull had been captured from one of the last wild herds in the Florida wetlands, part of a government roundup after farmers complained of crop damage. Jackson Whitley had purchased him at auction, seeing in those fierce dark eyes something worth saving. "He's a fighter," Jackson told his neighbor Mason Barrett that sweltering August afternoon. "Gonna make a fine breeding bull once he settles down." Mason, then newly appointed as a Texas Parks and Wildlife Ranger for the county, had nodded politely but kept his distance from the fence. At 6 feet tall, Mason was no small man, but Thunder made him feel diminutive. The bull's pronounced shoulder hump and dewlap swayed as he paced the corral, muscles rippling beneath his loose silver hide. "Uncle Mason." "Can I name him?" a little voice had called out from the porch. 10-year-old Lucy Barrett, Mason's niece, leaned forward in her wheelchair, her small frame already weakened by the leukemia that would take her life 8 months later. "That's up to Mr. Whitley, sweetheart," Mason had answered, his heart breaking a little at her enthusiasm despite her illness. Jackson had tipped his hat to the child. "I reckon he's yours to name, little lady." Lucy had watched the bull for long minutes, her pale face solemn. "Thunder," she'd finally declared, "because he sounds like a storm when he runs." In the months that followed, as Lucy's condition worsened, visits to see Thunder became her one joy. Mysteriously, the untamable bull that had injured 2 ranch hands grew calm in her presence. He would approach the fence when her wheelchair appeared, lowering his massive head as if in greeting. "He knows I'm sick," Lucy had whispered to Mason during what would be her final visit. Animals understand more than people think. After Lucy passed, Thunder became unapproachable again. Jackson kept him separate from the other cattle, a dangerous investment he couldn't bring himself to sell. The bull tolerated only Jackson himself and occasionally Mason, who would sit silently by the corral fence on the anniversary of Lucy's death. "Still wild at heart," Jackson would say, watching Thunder stare toward the distant horizon. "Some creatures ain't meant to be tamed, just respected." No one could have predicted that this untamable spirit would soon form a bond that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the natural world. A bond with a creature that, by all rights, should have been its mortal enemy. The day before the python encounter, Mason Barrett patrolled the southern edge of Whitley Ranch, his ranger truck kicking up dust along the fence line. The summer drought had turned the landscape into a palette of browns and yellows, with only the occasional green of live oak breaking the monotony. Mason drove slowly, scanning for breaks in the fence or signs of trespassers. Jackson's property backed up against state land, making it a tempting shortcut for all sorts of characters. Mason slowed as he spotted something unusual. Tire tracks cutting across a dry creek bed where no road existed. He pulled over, grabbed his hat, and stepped into the blistering Texas heat. The tracks were fresh, probably from the previous night, and belonged to a heavy vehicle. Following them on foot, he discovered something that made his blood run cold. A makeshift campsite with empty transport cages, some large enough for creatures much bigger than raccoons or opossums. "Damn wildlife traffickers," he muttered, crouching to examine a peculiar scale-like impression in the dirt. Mason had seen enough in his 12 years as a ranger to recognize signs of exotic reptiles. The illegal wildlife trade was booming in Texas, with everything from venomous snakes to exotic big cats changing hands for small fortunes. He snapped photos with his phone and called it in to headquarters. "Barrett here. Got evidence of trafficking activity on the south border of Whitley Ranch. Empty cages, possible reptile transport. Looks like they moved through last night." "Copy that, Mason," came the response. "Wildlife Trafficking Task Force is stretched thin with that bust over in Hill County. Can you secure the scene until tomorrow?" Mason agreed, though uneasiness settled in his gut. Whatever had been in those cages was now potentially loose in the area. As he walked back to his truck, a flutter of white caught his eye. A receipt stuck to a cactus. He carefully retrieved it. A gas station charge from Pensacola, Florida, dated just 3 days earlier. These traffickers had come a long way. The connection to Florida triggered memories Mason usually kept locked away. Lucy had loved the ocean. They'd taken her to Galveston Beach just weeks before her diagnosis, her thin legs splashing in the Gulf waters, her laughter carrying on the salt breeze. The cancer had taken that joyful child and left a hole in Mason's life that 3 years hadn't begun to fill. Back in his truck, Mason radioed Jackson. "Found signs of trespassers on your South 40. Might want to check your livestock tonight." "Appreciate the heads up," Jackson responded, his voice crackling over the radio. "Got that veterinarian lady coming to check some of the herd anyway. I'll have her give everything a once-over." The veterinarian. Mason had forgotten Dr. Emma Calloway was scheduled to visit the ranch today. She'd arrived in the county just 6 months ago, taking over the large animal practice from old Dr. Wilkins. Mason had met her briefly at a county meeting. Mid-40s, competent, with an intensity in her blue eyes that suggested she took her work very seriously. Jackson seemed to trust her, which was saying something. The old rancher didn't easily warm to newcomers. As Mason drove toward the ranch house, his thoughts drifted to Thunder. The bull had been agitated lately, refusing feed and pacing his enclosure. Mason wondered if somehow the animal sensed the anniversary of Lucy's death approaching next week. It seemed impossible, yet Mason had seen enough unusual behavior from the bull to stop dismissing such notions. The silver bull stood at the fence line, nostrils flaring as he scented the air. Something had changed. The usual smells of grass, earth, and cattle were overlaid with something new, something that triggered ancient memories. A scent from before, from the dark moving box that had brought him here. Thunder's muscles tensed as he recognized it. The musty, cold smell of the long ones. The silent hunters that had shared his journey into captivity. Mason arrived at the ranch house as Dr. Calloway's white truck was pulling away from the barn. He parked and approached Jackson, who sat in his usual spot on the porch, a glass of iced tea sweating in his gnarled hand. "Doc give the herd a clean bill of health?" Mason asked, declining Jackson's offer of tea with a shake of his head. "Mostly. Says that new heifer might be carrying twins." Jackson gestured toward the distant paddock where Thunder was now visible, still standing alertly at the fence. "She wanted to check Thunder too, but you know how he gets with strangers." Mason nodded, watching the bull's unusual behavior. "He seems worked up today." "Been that way since yesterday," Jackson said. "Reminds me of when we first got him. Like he's looking for something." The old man's eyes, still sharp despite his years, studied Mason. "You look troubled, son." Mason briefly explained what he'd found on the property line. Jackson's weathered face darkened. "Trafficking, huh? What kind of creatures we talking about? Hard to say for certain, but based on what I saw, reptiles. Big ones. Jackson spat over the porch railing. Just what we need, as if the drought and feed prices weren't enough to worry about. A comfortable silence fell between them, the kind that only exists between men who've known each other for years. Jackson had been Mason's father's best friend, and after his parents' accident, Jackson had stepped in as a surrogate father figure. When Lucy got sick, it was Jackson who made sure Mason kept his job, watching the girl during his shifts. Dr. Calloway seemed mighty interested in Thunder, Jackson said eventually. Asked all sorts of questions about his behavior, intelligence. Said she's doing some research on bovine cognition. Mason raised an eyebrow. That's so. Didn't peg her for a researcher. Me neither. But she knows her stuff about cattle. Jackson stood with a groan, his arthritic knees protesting. I'm headed into town for supplies. Keep an eye on things if you're around? Mason agreed, though his shift was technically over. After Jackson's truck disappeared down the long driveway, Mason walked out to Thunder's enclosure. The bull acknowledged his presence with a snort but didn't approach, continuing his vigilant stance at the fence line. What's got you so worked up, big guy? Mason asked quietly. Thunder's ear flicked toward him, but the bull's attention remained fixed on the distant tree line. Following his gaze, Mason scanned the horizon but saw nothing unusual. Still, years as a ranger had taught him to trust an animal's instincts. Something was out there, something that had Thunder on high alert. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch, Mason decided to make one more patrol around the property before heading home. He couldn't shake the feeling that the wildlife trafficking and Thunder's behavior were somehow connected, a ridiculous notion, yet persistent. What Mason couldn't know was that his instinct was correct. Less than a mile away, coiled in the hollow of an ancient live oak, a massive Burmese python was recovering from its escape. The creature had slithered from its damaged crate during transport, causing panic among the traffickers who had abandoned it, rather than risk capture. Now it was slowly moving toward the only familiar scent in this strange new territory, the distinctive smell of the great horned beast that had traveled beside it all the way from Florida. As night fell over Whitley Ranch, two predators sensed each other's presence across the darkness, their shared past pulling them toward an encounter that would challenge the natural order and change the lives of everyone who witnessed it. Mason Barrett sat in his truck outside his small rental house, keys dangling from his fingers, unable to make himself go inside. The emptiness waited for him there. No Lucy's laughter, no cheerful greeting, just the hollow echo of a life incomplete. 3 years since her passing, and some days the grief still felt fresh as an open wound. His radio crackled. "Barrett, you copy. Got a report of something big crossing Route 87 near the Whitley place. Caller said it looked like a giant snake. Probably nothing, but thought you'd want to know." Mason's exhaustion vanished. "Copy that. I'll check it out." The coincidence was too strong to ignore. Wildlife traffickers with reptile cages yesterday, a snake sighting today. As he turned his truck around, his mind raced with possibilities. Exotic snakes weren't uncommon in Texas these days. After Hurricane Andrew devastated Florida in '92, countless Burmese pythons escaped into the Everglades. Decades later, they'd become an ecological nightmare, with some specimens reaching 20 feet. The thought of such creatures establishing themselves in Texas kept wildlife officials up at night. Mason's duty was clear: locate the animal, capture or eliminate it, protect the public. Yet as he drove toward the Whitley Ranch, uncomfortable questions nagged at him. What would Lucy have said about killing a creature simply for existing where humans didn't want it? His niece had possessed a wisdom beyond her years, particularly about animals. "They're just doing what they're made to do, Uncle Mason," she'd once told him after he'd removed a rattlesnake from her school playground. "It's not their fault when that scares people." The ranch road was deserted in the gathering twilight. Mason slowed, scanning the ditches on either side. Something massive had indeed crossed here. The gravel was disturbed in a distinctive S pattern about 15 inches wide. Mason followed the trail with his flashlight until it disappeared into the dry scrubland. His radio crackled again. "Barrett, Chief wants an update when you can." Mason hesitated. Protocol demanded he call for the department's snake handling team. They'd arrive with rifles and catch poles, ready to eliminate what they'd undoubtedly classify as a dangerous invasive species. It was the correct procedure. "Nothing confirmed yet," he responded instead. "Just some tracks. I'll keep looking." Why had he lied? Mason wasn't sure. Perhaps it was Lucy's voice in his head, or perhaps it was the connection to Thunder's strange behavior. Either way, he decided to investigate further before involving others. Thunder paced his enclosure, muscles twitching beneath his silver coat. The scent was stronger now, unmistakable. The Long One was near. In the darkness of memory, Thunder recalled the swaying motion of their shared journey, the terror of confinement. How the Long One had curled beside him, their body heat mingling in the cold metal box. Neither predator nor prey to each other, fellow captives in the human world. When the humans had tried to separate them, jabbing at the Long One with sticks, Thunder had bellowed and charged the cage wall, creating enough distraction for the Long One to retreat from harm. Now that same scent approached, awakening something primal yet paradoxically gentle in the bull's consciousness. Recognition. At the ranch house, Jackson Whitley sat at his kitchen table reviewing bank statements, his face grim in the harsh overhead light. The numbers hadn't improved. 3 years of drought had withered his pastures, forcing him to buy supplemental feed at ruinous prices. The property tax assessment had increased again, and the medical bills from Martha's final illness still haunted his credit. Without significant changes, Whitley Ranch would be auctioned within a year, ending 4 generations of family stewardship. A potential solution lay in the manila envelope Dr. Calloway had left earlier. The Texas Agricultural Research Institute was seeking ranch properties for a long-term study on climate adaptation. Their offer would keep the ranch afloat, but the contract terms troubled Jackson. They wanted exclusive access to certain animals, particularly Thunder, with minimal oversight of their research methods. "What do you want with my bull?" Jackson had asked Emma directly. "Thunder represents a unique research opportunity," she'd replied, her professional demeanor slipping just enough to reveal her enthusiasm. "His behavior patterns suggest cognitive abilities far beyond what we typically observe in bovines. With proper study, we could significantly advance our understanding of animal intelligence." "You mean you want to run tests on him?" Jackson had said flatly. Emma's smile had faltered. "Minimally invasive observation, Mr. Whitley. I assure you he would be well treated." Jackson hadn't given her an answer. Now, looking at his financial reality, he wondered if he had the luxury of refusal. The thought of losing the ranch, of failing where his father and grandfather had succeeded, was almost unbearable. Yet the thought of betraying Thunder's trust was equally painful. The bull had been Martha's favorite. During her final months, when cancer had confined her to a wheelchair much like Lucy's, Thunder would stand at the fence for hours while Martha sat nearby. "He's keeping me company," she'd insisted when Jackson worried about her sitting in the heat. "We understand each other, that bull and me, both trapped in bodies that don't work right anymore." Jackson pushed the bank statements aside and reached for his late wife's Bible, seeking comfort in its familiar pages. Inside was a photograph, Martha sitting in her wheelchair beside Thunder's fence, her hand extended toward the massive bull who had lowered his head to her level. It was the only time Jackson had ever seen the animal approach someone voluntarily other than Lucy. "What would you do, Martha?" he whispered to the empty kitchen. The financial answer was clear, but the moral one remained clouded. Meanwhile, across town at the County Wildlife Management Office, heated voices echoed through the nearly empty building. Ranger Chief Wells pounded his desk in frustration. "For the last time, Peterson, we cannot authorize a community snake hunt. That's exactly how accidents happen." County Commissioner Peterson, a florid-faced man with political ambitions, leaned forward aggressively. "People are scared, Chief. First those alligators in the Marshall's Pond, now giant snakes. Voters want action." "What voters want and what's safe are two different things," Wells countered. "We have trained personnel for this. Barrett is checking out the report now." "Barrett?" Peterson scoffed. "That man's been soft since his niece died. Word is he relocated that gator family instead of eliminating them like protocol demanded." Wells' expression hardened. "Mason Barrett is the finest ranger in this department, and until you wear this uniform, you don't get to question how my officers interpret protocols in the field." The argument represented a broader tension within the community. 3 years of climate shifts had pushed wildlife into new territories, creating encounters that frightened residents. Some, like Peterson, advocated aggressive removal. Others, a growing minority, argued for coexistence strategies. Dr. Emma Calloway was listening to this debate from the hallway, having arrived to drop off vaccination records. Her research interests went far beyond routine veterinary care, though few in the county suspected the true nature of her work. For 15 years, she had documented instances of advanced problem-solving behaviors in animals, building a case that cognitive abilities had been systematically underestimated across species. Thunder was potentially her most significant discovery yet, a creature demonstrating not just intelligence, but something akin to empathy. Her observation equipment, disguised as routine veterinary tools, had captured the bull's interactions with Martha Whitley and his distinctive reactions to photographs of Lucy that Mason sometimes brought to the enclosure. Emma's funding sources would be disappointed if they knew her true motivation. They expected research that could be monetized, animal intelligence harnessed for human benefit. What Emma sought was something more profound, evidence that might fundamentally change how humans viewed and treated other species. As she slipped out of the building, her phone chimed with a text from her research assistant. Motion sensors triggered at Whitley Ranch. Large thermal signature moving near bull enclosure. Snake? Emma hurried to her truck. Whatever was happening at the ranch, she needed to document it firsthand without the interference of rangers or locals with rifles. The potential for a meaningful cross-species interaction, even a violent one, represented too valuable a research opportunity to miss. Back at the ranch, Mason had abandoned his truck to follow the snake's trail on foot. The tracks led directly toward Thunder's enclosure, confirming his suspicion of a connection. The wise course would be to call for backup, but something held him back. The same instinct that had made him an exceptional ranger, the ability to sense when a situation required observation rather than intervention. As he crested a small rise overlooking Thunder's enclosure, Mason froze. In the silver moonlight, he could make out two figures, the massive silhouette of Thunder, standing utterly still at the fence line and approaching from the scrubland, the sinuous form of the largest snake Mason had ever seen outside of a zoo. The Burmese python, its scales gleaming dully in the moonlight, moved with deliberate purpose toward the bull. Mason reached for his sidearm, then hesitated. Thunder wasn't panicking. The bull that would charge at any human who entered his space was watching the approaching predator with what appeared to be curiosity rather than fear. It defied everything Mason knew about natural behavior. "What are you doing, big guy?" he whispered. raising his binoculars for a better look. The scene before him would soon challenge not just Mason's understanding of animal behavior, but the fundamental assumptions that had guided his work as a wildlife ranger. By morning, nothing about his relationship with the natural world would remain unchanged. Mason's breath caught in his throat as the massive python slithered toward Thunder's enclosure. Its body, thick as a man's thigh and patterned with complex brown markings, moved with fluid grace across the dusty ground. Mason estimated it at nearly 20 feet long, an apex predator capable of killing animals far larger than itself. In the Everglades, pythons had been documented taking down full-grown alligators. Protocol demanded immediate action. As a ranger, Mason was authorized, expected, to eliminate invasive predators that posed threats to livestock and native wildlife. His hand hovered over his sidearm, but something held him back. Thunder's behavior defied explanation. The bull wasn't showing fear or aggression. Instead, he stood perfectly still, watching the approaching snake with what Mason could only describe as recognition. The python reached the fence line and raised its head, tongue flicking rapidly to taste the air. Thunder lowered his massive head until they were at eye level, separated only by the metal fencing. For a long moment, predator and prey regarded each other in silence. Then, incredibly, Thunder made a soft, lowing sound, almost gentle. "What in God's name?" Mason whispered. The python began to move again, paralleling the fence until it reached a section where the bottom rail had rusted through, creating a gap just large enough for its body. With methodical purpose, the snake began to squeeze through. Mason raised his pistol. If the python entered the enclosure, he'd have no choice but to shoot. Yet Thunder showed no distress as the massive reptile entered his territory. If anything, the bull seemed to be waiting. The long one had found him. Thunder's memories stirred, the dark, rocking box where they had first encountered each other, both captured from their homes. The humans had tried to separate them with sticks that sparked pain. Thunder had charged the metal wall, making the humans retreat. The long one had curled closer to him after that, their bodies sharing warmth in the cold transport. Now, after many seasons, the long one had returned. Mason watched in astonishment as the python completed its entry into the enclosure. 20 feet of predator now shared space with 1,700 pounds of Brahman bull. By every natural law, this should trigger an immediate flight or fight response. Instead, Thunder took a step closer to the massive snake. The python's head rose higher, nearly reaching Thunder's chest. Mason's finger tensed on the trigger, certain he was about to witness an attack. Then something extraordinary happened. The python lowered its head in a motion almost like a bow, and Thunder responded by gently extending his muzzle toward the snake. "They know each other," Mason breathed, lowering his weapon slightly. It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was before his eyes. These two creatures, natural enemies in any normal circumstance, were displaying what appeared to be mutual recognition. The moment shattered as headlights swept across the pasture. Dr. Emma Calloway's white truck pulled up beside Mason's, and she emerged clutching what looked like scientific equipment. "Don't shoot," she called, hurrying toward Mason. "Please, you need to see this." "See what?" Mason demanded, not lowering his weapon completely. "That python is an invasive predator. Department policy is clear." Emma's face was flushed with excitement. "This isn't just any encounter. Look at their body language. They're communicating." Mason frowned. "That bull cost Jackson $30,000. If that snake meant to harm Thunder, it would have struck already," Emma interrupted. "Please, give me 5 minutes to document this. It could be groundbreaking." Reluctantly, Mason agreed, though he kept his pistol ready. Emma quickly set up what appeared to be a specialized camera with thermal imaging capabilities. "I've been studying Thunder for months," she admitted as she worked. "His cognitive abilities are extraordinary. The way he problem solves, his emotional responses to photographs, he's exceptional even among highly intelligent bovines." "You've been studying him without permission?" Mason asked sharply. Emma had the grace to look embarrassed. "I've been gathering data during routine veterinary visits. Nothing invasive, I assure you." Before Mason could respond, a dramatic change occurred in the enclosure. The python suddenly tensed, its head swaying more actively. Thunder's posture shifted as well, becoming more alert. Both animals turned toward the far side of the pasture where the fence line met the wooded area. "Something spooked them," Mason said, raising his binoculars. Through the lenses, he detected movement at the tree line, human figures carrying what appeared to be long poles and nets. Poachers. They must have tracked the python to the ranch. "We've got company," Mason told Emma, reaching for his radio. "Wildlife traffickers, most likely. I'm calling this in." As Mason requested backup, the scene in the enclosure took another unexpected turn. The python, apparently sensing danger, began to move rapidly around the perimeter of the fence, searching for escape. In its agitated state, it collided with a rough section of the fence post, tearing several scales and drawing blood. Thunder reacted immediately, positioning himself between the wounded snake and the approaching humans. The bull pawed the ground, lowering his horns in a clear threat display, not toward the python but toward the poachers. "He's protecting it," Emma whispered, her camera whirring. "This is unprecedented." The poachers had spotted the python and were approaching the fence, unaware they were being observed. 3 men in dark clothing carrying snake hooks and capture bags large enough for sections of the massive reptile. "Texas Parks and Wildlife!" Mason shouted, stepping forward with his badge visible. "Stop where you are!" The men froze, then the largest of them bolted for the trees. The other 2 hesitated, caught between fleeing and continuing their pursuit of valuable contraband. Mason kept his weapon trained on them, ordering them to lie on the ground. One complied, the other made a break for it. As Mason pursued the fleeing poacher, the drama in the enclosure escalated. The python, agitated by the commotion, began moving erratically, its injured side leaving a trail of blood on the dusty ground. Thunder followed it closely, positioning his massive body as a shield between the snake and the humans. Emma continued filming, her scientific detachment wavering as she witnessed something that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal behavior. "They shouldn't be doing this," she murmured. "Interspecies protection outside of symbiotic relationships is extremely rare, especially between predator and potential prey." By the time Mason returned with the second poacher in handcuffs, the python had retreated to a far corner of the enclosure. Its injury, while not life-threatening, had clearly sapped its strength. Most surprisingly, Thunder had not moved from its side, standing guard over the wounded reptile. "Got one more hiding in the woods," Mason told Emma as patrol cars began arriving. "These 2 had transportation details that match what I found yesterday. They were moving exotic animals from Florida, including this python. Apparently, it escaped during transit." Emma's focus remained on the animals. "Mason, what we're witnessing is extraordinary. Thunder and this python must have encountered each other previously, perhaps during capture or transport. They've formed some kind of bond." Mason watched the bull standing protectively over the snake. "Lucy used to say animals understand more than we think. I always figured it was just a child's way of seeing the world." He shook his head. "Maybe she was right all along." As law enforcement secured the scene and took statements from Mason and Emma, the python's condition appeared to worsen. The snake had coiled itself tightly, its breathing visibly labored. "It needs medical attention," Emma said. "That wound could become infected quickly." "Department protocol says we euthanize invasive species," one of the newly arrived rangers pointed out. "Especially one this size." Mason found himself at a crossroads. Professional duty demanded he follow protocol, yet something deeper, perhaps the part of him that had loved Lucy's compassion for all living things, rebelled against this solution. "The python is evidence in a trafficking case," he said finally. "We need to keep it alive for the investigation." It was a thin justification, and everyone knew it. But Mason's reputation and the unusual circumstances created enough ambiguity for his decision to stand, at least temporarily. "I can treat it," Emma offered quickly. "I've worked with reptiles before." The senior ranger looked skeptical. "And where exactly would we keep a 20-foot python during this investigation?" "Right where it is," came a new voice. Jackson Whitley had arrived, his ancient pickup truck groaning to a halt beside the patrol cars. The old rancher surveyed the scene with weathered calm, taking in the wounded python, the protective bull, and the cluster of law enforcement. "That snake stays in Thunder's enclosure until we figure this out," Jackson continued. "Any man who tries to remove it will answer to me." The authority in the old man's voice, born from decades of commanding respect in the county, created a momentary silence. Mason seized the opportunity. "Mr. Whitley is right. Moving the snake in its current condition would be dangerous for everyone involved. Dr. Calloway can provide treatment, and I'll take full responsibility for monitoring the situation." The senior ranger looked from Mason to Jackson, then to the strange tableau of bull and snake. "On your head be it, Barrett. But if that thing hurts anybody or any livestock, the department won't back you." As the officers departed with the arrested poachers, Mason, Emma, and Jackson stood watching Thunder and the python in the moonlight. The bull had not moved from his protective position, occasionally lowering his head to gently nudge the injured snake as if checking its condition. "I've seen a lot in my 80 years, Jackson said quietly, "but nothing like this." Emma's scientific curiosity had given way to something approaching awe. "They're communicating on some level we don't understand. This challenges everything we think we know about animal cognition and interspecies relationships." Mason thought of Lucy, of her insistence that animals had depths humans rarely acknowledged. "What if we've been underestimating them all along?" he wondered aloud. "What if they understand more, feel more than we've ever given them credit for?" As dawn broke over Whitley Ranch, news of the strange bond between bull and python had already begun to spread. By sunrise, the first curious onlookers and local reporters had gathered at the property line, eager to glimpse what many were already calling a miracle of nature. None of them yet realized that the real miracle was just beginning, or that their understanding of the animal world was about to be fundamentally challenged by what would unfold in the days ahead. The sun climbed high over Whitley Ranch as word spread about the unusual alliance between Thunder and the massive python. By mid-morning, a small crowd had gathered at the road, kept at a distance by hastily erected sawhorses and Mason's authority as a ranger. News vans from San Antonio and Houston had arrived, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like mechanical sunflowers. "This is private property," Mason repeated for what felt like the 100th time. "Mr. Whitley isn't giving interviews, and no, you cannot bring your cameras closer to the enclosure." Inside the ranch house, Jackson sat at his kitchen table with Emma Calloway, reviewing her treatment plan for the injured python. "I've administered antibiotics and cleaned the wound," Emma explained. "The scales were torn pretty badly, but reptiles have remarkable healing capabilities. My concern is stress. Pythons aren't accustomed to this much human activity." Jackson nodded, his weathered hands cradling a mug of coffee. "What about Thunder? He hasn't eaten since yesterday." "He's standing guard," Emma said, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. "I've never documented behavior like this between unrelated species, especially natural enemies. It's as if he's appointed himself the snake's protector." Jackson's eyes drifted to the window, where he could see the distant outline of Thunder still positioned beside the coiled python. Martha used to say animals recognize kindred spirits. Thought it was just her soft heart talking. A faint smile touched his lips. Maybe she was on to something. Their conversation was interrupted by the rumble of approaching vehicles. Through the window they saw 3 black SUVs pulling up beside the news vans. Men in suits emerged, followed by a familiar figure that made Jackson's expression harden, County Commissioner Peterson. "Trouble," Jackson muttered, reaching for his hat. Outside, Mason intercepted Peterson and his entourage before they could breach the barrier. "This area is restricted during an ongoing investigation," he stated firmly. Peterson's florid face twisted into a politician's smile. "Ranger Barrett, I believe you know Dr. Harmon from the Texas Invasive Species Institute and Mr. Chandler from the Governor's Agricultural Commission." Mason nodded curtly to the men. Dr. Harmon he recognized from department briefings, a stern advocate for aggressive elimination of invasive species. Chandler was unfamiliar but carried himself with the entitled confidence of political appointees. "Gentlemen, as I was explaining to the commissioner, we have an active wildlife trafficking investigation underway." Dr. Harmon stepped forward. "We understand completely, Ranger. That's why we're here. That Burmese python represents a significant ecological threat. The governor's office has authorized us to remove and humanely euthanize it immediately." Mason felt a chill despite the Texas heat. "With all due respect, sir, that python is evidence in a criminal case, and it's currently on private property." "Evidence can be photographed," Chandler interjected smoothly, "and we have emergency authorization to access private property when public safety is at risk." He produced an official-looking document. "Signed this morning." Before Mason could respond, Jackson appeared at his side, Emma following close behind. "This is still my land," Jackson said, his voice quiet but unyielding. "That paper might give you the right to come onto my property, but it doesn't give you the right to dictate what happens to animals under my care." Peterson smiled thinly. "Under your care? Jackson, that's a dangerous invasive predator, not a house pet. It's already killed livestock across 3 counties. "You have proof it's the same snake?" Mason challenged. Peterson waved dismissively. "It's a 20-foot python. How many do you think are roaming Texas?" Emma stepped forward, her professional demeanor firmly in place. "Gentlemen, I'm Dr. Emma Calloway, the veterinarian treating both animals. Moving either creature right now would create unnecessary risk to personnel and potentially fatal stress to the python." Dr. Harmon's eyes narrowed. "Doctor, with all due respect, your job is to care for livestock, not preserve invasive species." "My job," Emma replied evenly, "is to apply medical science regardless of species. And right now, science tells me that separating these animals would be dangerous for everyone involved." The standoff might have continued indefinitely, if not for a sudden commotion from the spectators. A murmur rippled through the crowd, followed by gasps and pointed fingers. All eyes turned toward Thunder's enclosure. The massive bull was moving, not in his usual patrol of the fence line, but with deliberate purpose toward the water trough. More surprisingly, the python was moving too, sliding alongside him like a strange companion. As they watched, Thunder lowered his head to drink, and the python extended its body partially into the water, its wounded side submerged. "It's using the water to soothe its injury," Emma whispered, and Thunder let it there. The crowd fell silent, cameras clicking furiously to capture the extraordinary scene. Even Dr. Harmon seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Mason seized the opportunity. "As you can see, gentlemen, we have a unique situation that requires careful handling. I propose a 48-hour observation period before any decisions are made." Peterson began to object, but Chandler raised a hand to silence him. Unlike the others, Chandler seemed genuinely intrigued by what he was witnessing. 2 days, Ranger Barrett. But we'll need continuous monitoring and regular reports." His eyes shifted to Emma. "Dr. Calloway, would you be willing to oversee this observation officially?" Emma nodded, her expression carefully neutral despite her internal excitement. "Of course. I'll provide hourly updates on both animals' conditions." As the officials retreated to discuss the situation, Mason pulled Emma aside. "What just happened? I expected them to bring in a capture team immediately." Emma glanced toward Chandler, who was now on his phone. "Chandler's from the Agricultural Commission, but he's also on the board of the Texas Natural History Museum. I suspect scientific curiosity just overrode political expediency." "We've bought some time," Jackson said, joining them. "But Peterson won't give up that easy. Man's built his re-election campaign on being tough on invasive species." Mason nodded grimly. 2 days isn't much time to figure this out. "It's enough to document their interaction," Emma said. "If I can gather sufficient evidence of their unusual bond, we might make a case for a special exemption." The conversation halted as they noticed a new development in the enclosure. Thunder had moved to the fence line where a small group of onlookers had gathered despite the barriers. The bull's posture was alert but not aggressive. Behind him, the python remained by the water trough, its wounded side still submerged. "He's keeping himself between the snake and the crowd," Mason observed. "Protective positioning," Emma agreed. "He's acting as a buffer between a perceived threat and an injured companion." One of the spectators, a young man with a camera, suddenly ducked under the barrier and approached the fence for a closer photograph. Before Mason could intervene, Thunder reacted. The bull didn't charge but issued a deep, rumbling bellow that stopped the trespasser in his tracks. The 2 legs were too close. Thunder could smell their excitement, their curiosity, the underlying scent of fear. The long one was wounded, vulnerable. These 2 legs were not like the gentle one who had called him Thunder, nor like the old one who brought food. These were strangers, and strangers meant danger. He positioned himself, making his body large, warning them away from the long one who had once shared his dark journey. Mason quickly escorted the photographer back behind the barrier, his expression stern. "Sir, that bull weighs nearly a ton and can move faster than you can. The next time you cross that line, I'll have you arrested." The incident highlighted the precarious nature of their situation. While Thunder had shown remarkable restraint, he was still a powerful animal with protective instincts. The python, despite its injury, remained a predator capable of killing a human. The risk of an accident grew with each curious onlooker who arrived. By late afternoon, Jackson had hired local ranch hands to reinforce the perimeter with proper fencing. News crews filmed from a designated area, their telephoto lenses capturing the continuing saga of bull and snake. Emma had set up a small observation post near the enclosure, carefully documenting every interaction between the unlikely pair. "Thunder has checked on the python exactly 14 times in the past 3 hours, she told Mason as he brought her fresh coffee. "Each time he approaches slowly, lowers his head to the snake's level, and waits until the python acknowledges him with movement before moving away." Mason watched as Thunder demonstrated this very behavior, approaching the coiled python with deliberate care. "It's almost like he's asking permission to come closer." "Exactly," Emma said, excitement evident in her voice. "That's respect behavior. You see it in social mammals, but rarely between species, and almost never between predator and prey." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "Mason, what we're witnessing challenges fundamental assumptions about animal cognition and behavior. These aren't just instinctive responses. There's something deeper happening here." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the enclosure, another vehicle approached the ranch, an expensive black pickup truck with darkened windows. Mason tensed, expecting more officials or perhaps media, but instead a tall man in expensive boots and a custom Stetson emerged. Victor Ramos, owner of the largest exotic game ranch in the county, and a man known for his collection of rare animals. "This is private property, Mr. Ramos," Mason said, intercepting him before he could reach Jackson. Ramos smiled, his teeth white against his tanned skin. "Ranger Barrett, just paying a neighborly visit." Jackson's got himself a situation. His eyes drifted to the enclosure where Thunder and the python were visible in the fading light. Magnificent specimens, both of them. Mason had dealt with Ramos before. The man operated within the letter of the law, but pushed every boundary. His exotic game ranch catered to wealthy clients who paid small fortunes to hunt non-native species in a controlled environment. "Mr. Whitley isn't entertaining visitors," Mason said firmly. "Not even ones bearing solutions?" Ramos reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. "I'm prepared to offer Jackson a very generous sum for both animals. My facility has proper containment for the python, and Thunder would make an impressive addition to my breeding program." The suggestion that Thunder might be sold ignited something protective in Mason. "Thunder isn't for sale. Everything has a price, Ranger." Ramos's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Especially when a property is facing foreclosure." The comment caught Mason off guard. How did Ramos know about Jackson's financial troubles? Before he could respond, Jackson himself approached, having overheard the conversation. "Victor," he acknowledged, with a curt nod. "Been a while?" "Too long, Jackson." Ramos extended his hand, which Jackson briefly shook. "I was just telling Ranger Barrett here that I might have a solution to your python problem." "Heard about that all the way at your place, did you?" Jackson's tone was neutral, but Mason detected the underlying suspicion. Ramos gestured expansively. "News travels fast. And when I heard about a bull protecting a python, well, that's the kind of unique attraction my clients would pay good money to see." Jackson's weathered face revealed nothing. "These animals aren't circus performers, Victor." "Of course not. They'd be treated with the utmost respect." Ramos withdrew an envelope from his pocket. "I've taken the liberty of drawing up an initial offer. I think you'll find it addresses certain pressing concerns." Jackson took the envelope but didn't open it. "I'll consider it." Ramos tipped his hat. "That's all I ask. Though I should mention, my offer has a sunset clause. The python, remarkable as it is, remains an illegal species in Texas. Once the authorities decide to euthanize it, which they will, my offer becomes significantly less generous." After Ramos departed, Mason turned to Jackson. "You're not seriously considering selling Thunder?" The old rancher's eyes were tired. "Don't much like the idea. But liking and affording are different things, son. Jackson, that man runs glorified canned hunts. Thunder would be—" "I know what Victor does," Jackson interrupted. "I also know what the bank does when you can't make payments." He patted Mason's shoulder. "Don't worry about it tonight. We've got more pressing concerns." Indeed they did. As darkness fell completely, Emma reported that the python's condition had stabilized, but it remained vulnerable. Thunder had taken up a position that allowed him to monitor both the snake and the perimeter of the enclosure, occasionally pacing in what appeared to be a sentry pattern. "He's established a protection routine," Emma explained as they watched from her observation post. "I've seen similar behavior in herd animals guarding injured members, but never directed toward another species." Mason shook his head in wonder. "Lucy would have loved this. She always insisted Thunder was special." Emma glanced at him. "Your niece named him?" "Yeah." Mason's expression softened at the memory. "She was the only one he seemed to like from the beginning. After she got sick, visiting Thunder became her favorite thing. She'd sit by his fence for hours talking to him like he understood every word." "Maybe he did," Emma said quietly. "Recent research suggests bovines have far more complex emotional and cognitive capabilities than we've previously acknowledged." As they spoke, Headlights appeared on the ranch road, more vehicles approaching despite the late hour. Mason raised his binoculars, then cursed under his breath. Peterson's back, and he's brought friends. 3 official-looking trucks were making their way toward the enclosure, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Mason could make out the logo of the Texas Invasive Species Control Unit on the lead vehicle. They're not waiting for the 48 hours, he realized, reaching for his radio to alert Jackson. Emma's face paled. They can't separate them now. The python's condition is still too fragile, and Thunder will become aggressive if strangers enter his space. As the vehicles pulled up, Mason stepped forward to intercept them, his hand resting on his sidearm, not as a threat, but as a reminder of his authority. Commissioner Peterson emerged from the first truck, followed by 2 men in tactical gear carrying specialized snake-handling equipment. "That's far enough, Commissioner," Mason called. "We have an agreement for a 48-hour observation period." Peterson's smile was cold in the harsh vehicle lights. "Circumstances have changed, Ranger Barrett. We've received reports that the python has become agitated. Public safety concerns override previous arrangements." "That's simply not true," Emma interjected, joining Mason. "I've been monitoring both animals continuously. The python is recovering steadily and showing no signs of aggression." Peterson ignored her, addressing the capture team. "Proceed as planned. Tranquilize the bull if necessary, but your priority is securing the python." Mason stepped directly into their path. "As the ranking wildlife officer present, I am not authorizing this operation. The situation is stable, and intervention now creates unnecessary risk." For a tense moment, it seemed Peterson might order the team to proceed anyway. Then Jackson's voice cut through the standoff. "This is still my property, Commissioner." The old rancher emerged from the darkness, shotgun held casually but visibly at his side. "And on my property, we respect Ranger Barrett's authority." Peterson's face flushed with anger. "This is obstruction, Whitley. I could have you arrested." "You could try," Jackson acknowledged calmly. "But then you'd have to explain to the voting public why you arrested an 80-year-old rancher for protecting his livestock on his own land. Might make an interesting headline." The political calculation was visible on Peterson's face. Finally, he turned to the capture team. "We'll resume at first light. Set up a perimeter and maintain surveillance." As Peterson and his men retreated to establish their monitoring position, Mason turned to Jackson. "That was too close. They'll be back with more authority tomorrow." Jackson nodded grimly. "Bought us the night, at least. Now we need a plan for morning." Emma had returned to her observation equipment, her expression troubled. "Something's changed. Look at Thunder's behavior." The bull had become more agitated, pacing the fence line nearest to the parked vehicles. The python, previously resting, had also become more active, raising its head and tasting the air with rapid flicks of its tongue. "They sense the threat," Mason said. "They know something's coming." As they watched, Thunder did something none of them expected. The massive bull approached the wounded python and lowered himself to the ground beside it, his huge body creating a barrier between the snake and the direction of the vehicles. The python, in turn, partially uncoiled and extended its body alongside the bull's flank. "They're protecting each other," Emma whispered, her scientific detachment momentarily forgotten. "I've never seen anything like this." Mason thought of Lucy again, of her insistence that animals understood more than humans gave them credit for. In the pale moonlight, watching a bull and a python find common cause against human intervention, he couldn't help but think she had been right all along. Dawn broke over Whitley Ranch with ominous clouds gathering on the horizon. The Weather Service had issued flash flood warnings for the county. Unusual for August, but the remnants of a Gulf hurricane were pushing moisture inland. Mason stood on Jackson's porch, nursing a cup of coffee as he watched Peterson's men checking their equipment near Thunder's enclosure. "Barometer's dropping fast," Jackson observed, joining him. "My knee says we're in for a gully washer." Could work in our favor, Mason replied. Might delay their operation, Jackson snorted. Peterson's not the type to let a little rain stop him. Man's got too much political capital invested in being the invasive species crusader. Inside the kitchen, Emma was reviewing her night's observations with a colleague on a video call. She'd documented every interaction between Thunder and the python, which she'd started calling Omen, after hearing one of Peterson's men use the term. The name had an ominous ring, but it had stuck. They maintained physical proximity throughout the night, Emma explained to her colleague. The bull consistently positioned himself between the python and perceived threats. When the python showed signs of discomfort, the bull adjusted his position to provide better shelter. It's unprecedented, her colleague replied, his skepticism evident even through the small screen. Are you certain you're not anthropomorphizing? Emma's expression hardened. I've been studying animal behavior for 20 years, David. I know the difference between scientific observation and projection. As she ended the call, Mason entered the kitchen. Any change in their condition? Omen's wound is healing well, but both animals are showing increased stress responses. Emma rubbed her eyes, fatigue evident in her posture. They know something's coming. Outside, the first heavy raindrops began to fall, pattering against the tin roof. Jackson glanced toward the creek that bordered his property to the east. That waterway rises fast in heavy rain. Mason, might want to move your truck to higher ground. Mason nodded, but before he could respond, Peterson's voice crackled over his radio. Barrett, we're proceeding with the extraction. Rain's only going to make conditions worse. Negative, Mason replied immediately. Flash flood warnings are in effect. This operation should be postponed. Not your call anymore, Ranger, Peterson responded with evident satisfaction. State Wildlife Director just authorized emergency removal. We're moving in. Mason exchanged alarmed looks with Emma and Jackson. We need to get down there, he said, already heading for the door. By the time they reached Thunder's enclosure, Peterson's team had assembled in full tactical gear, 6 men with tranquilizer rifles, snake hooks, and capture equipment. The rain was falling steadily now, turning the ground to mud and reducing visibility. This is dangerous and unnecessary, Mason argued, confronting Peterson beneath a hastily erected canopy. These conditions increase risks to both the animals and your personnel. Peterson's smile was cold. Concerned for the snake's welfare, Barrett? Seems you've lost perspective on your job. My job is wildlife management based on science and safety, not political expediency, Mason shot back. Emma stepped forward, professional demeanor firmly in place despite her clear anger. Commissioner, as the veterinarian responsible for both animals, I must formally object to this operation. The python's wound is still healing, and attempting capture in these conditions could prove fatal. Duly noted, Doctor, Peterson replied dismissively. Now please step aside. This is an official operation. In the enclosure, Thunder and Omen had positioned themselves beneath the shelter of a small lean-to Jackson had built years ago for shade. The bull stood alert, his massive frame tense as he watched the humans preparing outside his fence. The python was partially coiled beside him, its injured side protected. The 2 legs had brought the sharp sticks that sting and make the body heavy. Thunder recognized them from his capture long ago. They had come for the long one, would separate them again. The small female 2 legs who smelled of healing had tried to prevent it, as had the young male who sometimes carried the scent of the gentle small one who had named him. But there were too many others now. Thunder shifted his weight, ready to defend. Team 1 will tranquilize the bull, the operation leader instructed. Once he's down, Team 2 moves in for the snake. Clean and quick, people. Mason made one final attempt. Commissioner, I am formally requesting you delay this operation due to unsafe weather conditions. Peterson ignored him, giving the hand signal to proceed. 2 men with tranquilizer rifles took position at the fence, sighting on Thunder through the increasingly heavy rain. What happened next occurred with such suddenness that later accounts would differ. As the first man fired, a tremendous crack of thunder directly overhead startled both shooters. The dart meant for Thunder's flank went wide, striking the wooden post of the lean-to instead. The second dart hit its mark, but at an angle that prevented full injection. Thunder bellowed in pain and anger, charging toward the fence with such force that the men scrambled backward, slipping in the mud. The bull pulled up short of the fence, pawing the ground in a clear threat display. "Reload!" the team leader shouted over the intensifying storm. Before they could comply, a new sound rose above the rainfall, a roar of rushing water. Mason turned toward the noise, his ranger's instincts immediately recognizing the danger. "Flash flood!" he shouted. "Everyone to high ground, now!" The creek had overflowed its banks with astonishing speed, a wall of muddy water surging across the lower pasture toward the enclosure. Peterson's men abandoned their equipment, scrambling toward their vehicles as the water rushed toward them. "The animals!" Emma cried, pointing toward Thunder and Omen. The water was already seeping under the fence, quickly turning the enclosure into a muddy pool. Mason made a split-second decision. "Jackson, where's the enclosure key?" The old rancher pulled a ring of keys from his pocket. "You can't go in there, son. That bull's agitated and wounded." "Those animals will drown if we don't get them out," Mason insisted, taking the keys. The flood cut off their escape route to the high ground on the north side. Emma grabbed his arm. "I'm coming with you." "I can handle Omen if he's able to move." Mason wanted to refuse, but there was no time to argue. Together they splashed through the rapidly rising water toward the enclosure gate. Behind them, Jackson was shouting into his radio, coordinating with emergency services as Peterson and his men retreated to their vehicles. The water was knee-deep by the time Mason unlocked the gate. Thunder watched their approach, his sides heaving, the tranquilizer dart still protruding from his shoulder. "Easy, big guy," Mason called, trying to keep his voice calm despite the chaos around them. "We're here to help." Thunder pawed the ground, uncertain. The python had uncoiled partially, raising its head to taste the air, clearly agitated by the rising water. "The tranquilizer is affecting him," Emma observed, "but not enough to bring him down. That makes him unpredictable." Mason moved slowly toward Thunder, palms open in a non-threatening gesture. "Hey, Thunder, remember me?" "Lucy's uncle." At the mention of Lucy's name, the bull's aggressive posture softened slightly. Mason continued forward, speaking calmly despite the water now reaching mid-thigh and still rising rapidly. "That's it. Good boy. We need to get you both to higher ground." Thunder allowed Mason to approach and carefully remove the dart from his shoulder. Emma, meanwhile, had cautiously approached Omen, assessing the python's condition. "He's too weak to move quickly on his own," she called over the storm. "The flood water is cold, and reptiles slow down in lower temperatures." Mason looked around desperately. The water continued to rise, now nearly waist-deep in the lowest part of the enclosure. The nearest high ground was the ridge behind Jackson's barn, but to reach it, they would need to cross the main flow of the flood, a dangerous proposition even without two massive animals in tow. A flash of inspiration hit him. "The trailer, Jackson's horse trailer, is parked by the barn. If we can get them into it, we can tow them to safety." Emma nodded, already wading back toward Omen. "I'll need help with him. He's at least 200 pounds. As Mason moved to assist her, a sudden surge of water knocked Emma off her feet. She disappeared beneath the muddy surface for a heart-stopping moment before Mason could grab her arm and pull her up. "I'm okay," she gasped, clinging to him. "But we need to hurry." Before they could reach Omen, Thunder made a decision of his own. The massive bull moved toward the python with purposeful strides, seemingly less affected by the tranquilizer than they had feared. As Mason and Emma watched in astonishment, Thunder positioned himself beside Omen, lowering his body in what appeared to be an invitation. "Is he?" Emma began, disbelief evident in her voice. The python, perhaps acting on instinct or some deeper understanding, began to move, sliding up onto Thunder's broad back as the bull remained crouched in the rising water. "Ah, he's helping Omen," Mason whispered, awestruck despite the danger surrounding them. With the python draped across his back, Thunder rose and turned toward Mason and Emma as if waiting for guidance. The scene was so extraordinary that for a moment they both forgot the peril they were in. A shout from the gate broke the spell. Jackson was there with his ancient farm truck, water washing around its tires. "Move it, you two! Creek's still rising!" Mason snapped back to action. "Come on, Thunder, this way!" To his amazement, the bull followed his direction, carefully carrying his serpentine passenger through the gate and toward Jackson's truck. The old rancher had dropped the tailgate and created a makeshift ramp from fence boards. "Can he climb that?" Jackson shouted over the storm. "He'll have to," Mason replied, guiding Thunder toward the ramp. The bull hesitated at the unfamiliar structure, shifting his weight nervously. The python, sensing the disruption, began to slide from its position. "He's losing Omen," Emma cried, wading closer despite the risk. Thunder seemed to understand the problem. With a deliberate motion that defied natural behavior, the bull carefully adjusted his stance, using his massive head to gently nudge the python back into a secure position on his back. Then, with a certainty that left all three humans speechless, Thunder ascended the makeshift ramp and stepped into the truck bed. Once inside, the bull carefully lowered himself, allowing Omen to slide onto the truck bed floor. The python immediately coiled into a defensive position, but remained calm, its head raised to watch the humans. "I've never—" Emma began, unable to complete the thought as she stared at the two animals. "Get in," Jackson ordered, already behind the wheel. "Water's still rising." Mason helped Emma into the cab, then climbed in himself, soaked and muddy, but filled with a sense of wonder that overshadowed their narrow escape. As Jackson navigated the truck toward higher ground, Mason looked back through the rear window at the extraordinary passengers in the truck bed. Thunder had positioned himself protectively around Omen's coiled form, his massive body creating a barrier against the rain and wind. The bull's eyes met Mason's through the glass, and for a brief moment Mason could have sworn he saw recognition there, not just of him, but of their shared purpose in protecting the python. "Lucy was right about him," Mason said softly. "She always said he understood everything." Emma, shivering beside him, nodded. "What we just witnessed goes beyond trained behavior or instinct. That was problem-solving, empathy, and cooperation between species that should be natural enemies." Jackson guided the truck up to the ridge where other ranch hands had gathered with livestock rescued from the lower pastures. The rain was beginning to slacken, but the floodwaters continued to rise in the valley below. From their vantage point, they could see Peterson's vehicles retreating down the flooded access road, one of them being pushed by men after apparently stalling in the high water. "Looks like your python got a stay of execution," Jackson observed wryly. "This changes everything," Emma said, her scientific mind already racing ahead. "If I can document what we just witnessed, the deliberate assistance, the cooperation under stress, it could revolutionize how we understand cross-species cognition." Mason was only half listening, his attention still on Thunder and Omen in the truck bed. The bull had remained calm throughout the journey, attentive to the python's position and comfort, despite his own injury and the effects of the partial tranquilizer. As they watched, Omen slowly extended his body, stretching across the truck bed until his head rested against Thunder's flank. The bull lowered his own head, creating a sheltered space between his bulk and the side of the truck where the python could rest, protected from the elements. "They're not just tolerating each other," Mason said quietly. "They're finding comfort in each other's presence." The flood had washed away Peterson's immediate plans, but Mason knew their reprieve was temporary. Soon the authorities would regroup, The arguments about invasive species and public safety would resume, and Thunder and Omen would again face separation. Yet something had fundamentally changed in the past 24 hours. In witnessing these animals' extraordinary bond, Mason, Emma, and even old Jackson had glimpsed something that challenged their understanding of the natural world, something that couldn't be easily dismissed or forgotten. As the rain finally stopped and patches of blue appeared between the clouds, Mason made a silent promise to Lucy, to Thunder, and to the improbable python that had upended everything he thought he knew about the creatures under his protection. Whatever came next, he would fight to keep them together. Some bonds once formed deserved to be honored, even when they defied every natural law and human expectation. The floodwaters receded over the next 48 hours, leaving Whitley Ranch mud-soaked but largely intact. Jackson's house and main barn stood on high ground, spared the worst of the damage. Thunder's enclosure, however, lay in ruins, fencing washed away and the ground littered with debris carried downstream. Mason spent those 2 days in a flurry of activity, splitting his time between helping with county-wide rescue operations and strategizing how to protect Thunder and Omen from the inevitable return of Peterson and his team. The python and bull remained in a hastily reinforced corral behind Jackson's barn, their unusual bond continuing to defy natural explanation. Emma had barely slept, documenting every interaction between the animals with scientific precision. Her professional reputation hung in the balance. Claiming cross-species altruistic behavior between natural enemies was the kind of assertion that could either revolutionize her field or end her career. They maintained physical proximity even when given space to separate, she explained to Mason as they watched the animals from the barn loft. And look at their sleeping patterns. Thunder remains alert while Omen rests, then they switch. It's coordinated protection behavior. Mason nodded, though his thoughts were elsewhere. During a brief return to his apartment to change clothes, he'd impulsively retrieved a box he rarely opened, Lucy's personal items. Among them was her journal, filled with childish handwriting and colorful drawings. He'd brought it back to the ranch, drawn to a particular entry he remembered. "Emma," he said finally, "I need to show you something." He opened the journal to a page dated 3 months before Lucy's death. The entry described a visit to Whitley Ranch and was accompanied by a drawing of Thunder standing next to what appeared to be a large snake. "Thunder told me a secret today," Lucy had written in purple crayon. "He had a snake friend when he was captured. They were in the dark box together for a long time. The men were mean to the snake, but Thunder protected him. I told Thunder that his snake friend might find him someday. He believes me." Emma's scientific skepticism battled with the evidence before her eyes. "Mason, this could be coincidence or a child's imagination." "I know how it sounds," Mason admitted. "But Lucy had a way of understanding things. And look at them now." He gestured toward the corral where Thunder stood protectively beside Omen. "What if they really do know each other? What if they were transported together when Thunder was captured in Florida?" Emma began pacing the small loft space. If, and this is a massive if, they were previously acquainted during capture or transport, it could explain their recognition behavior. Her scientific mind was racing. Shared trauma has been documented as a bonding mechanism across multiple species. And Burmese pythons are established in the Florida Everglades, where you said Thunder was captured. Before Mason could respond, Jackson called up from below. "Mason, you've got company!" They descended to find a familiar black pickup truck parked in the drive. Victor Ramos stood conversing with Jackson, both men looking toward the corral. "Ranger Barrett," Ramos greeted with a tip of his custom Stetson, "and Dr. Calloway, I've heard remarkable things about your research." Mason's guard immediately went up. "Mr. Ramos, what brings you back to Whitley Ranch?" The flood, naturally, came to offer Jackson assistance with repairs. Ramos gestured toward the corral. Though I admit I'm most curious about your unusual guests. The videos have gone viral, you know. Videos? Emma asked sharply. Ramos pulled out his phone, showing them footage of Thunder carrying Omen through the floodwaters. The shaky recording had obviously been taken by one of Peterson's men. 3 million views since yesterday, Ramos said. People are calling it a miracle of nature, the bull who saved a python. Mason exchanged concerned glances with Emma. Public attention would only complicate their already precarious situation. I've come with a new proposition, Ramos continued, addressing Jackson directly. Not purchase this time, but partnership. My wildlife sanctuary has the facilities and legal permits to house both animals. You would retain ownership with exclusive research access for Dr. Calloway. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Mason asked skeptically. Ramos smiled. The prestige of hosting the most famous animal duo in Texas. Properly managed educational tours could generate significant revenue, which we would share, of course. Before anyone could respond, a distinctive ringtone sounded from Emma's pocket. Her face tightened as she checked the screen. Excuse me, I need to take this. She stepped away, moving toward the barn for privacy. Jackson considered Ramos thoughtfully. Your sanctuary has the proper permits for exotic species? Fully licensed and inspected, Ramos confirmed. And unlike certain government agencies, we value conservation over elimination. Mason couldn't argue with the practical appeal of Ramos's offer. It would resolve the python's legal status and keep the animals together. Yet, something about Ramos's eagerness made him uneasy. We appreciate the offer, Mason said carefully, but we need time to consider all options. Ramos nodded graciously. Of course. Though I should mention, Commissioner Peterson has called an emergency county meeting for tomorrow morning. Topic of discussion: invasive species enforcement following flood emergency. I suspect your timeline for decision-making may be rather compressed. After Ramos departed, Mason turned to Jackson. What do you think? The old rancher sighed heavily. Don't much like the idea of Thunder becoming a sideshow attraction. But Ramos is right about one thing. Peterson won't wait long to resume his campaign. Their conversation was interrupted by Emma's return. Her expression was troubled, her earlier scientific enthusiasm replaced by obvious distress. Emma? What is it? Mason asked. She hesitated, conflict evident in her features. That was my research director. I haven't been entirely forthcoming with you both. She took a deep breath. My position here isn't just as a veterinarian. I'm leading a study on advanced cognitive behaviors in domestic animals, funded by the Agricultural Research Institute. Mason felt a cold knot form in his stomach. What kind of study? Initially, observation only. Thunder's unusual behaviors had been noted by previous vets. When I arrived and saw him myself, I requested permission to document his responses. She looked down. When Omen appeared and they formed this bond, my director saw an opportunity for groundbreaking research. What kind of opportunity? Jackson demanded, his weathered face hardening. Emma winced at his tone. The kind that involves bringing both animals to our research facility for controlled observation and cognitive testing. Testing? Mason repeated, anger rising. You mean experimentation? Non-invasive, Emma insisted. But yes, more intensive than simple observation. My director has already filed for emergency permits to take custody of both animals for scientific necessity. The betrayal hit Mason like a physical blow. He'd begun to trust Emma, to see her as an ally in protecting Thunder and Omen. You've been planning this all along. No! Emma's denial was immediate and passionate. I was sent to observe Thunder, yes, but everything changed when I saw them together. Her voice softened. Mason, what's happening between these animals is beyond anything in our scientific understanding. I've been arguing with my director for 2 days, trying to convince him that separating them for laboratory study would destroy exactly what makes their relationship valuable. Jackson's expression remained skeptical. Mighty convenient timing for your director to call right after Ramos makes his offer. Emma flushed. My director has informants in Peterson's office. He likely heard about Ramos's visit the same way he hears everything, through political channels. Mason walked to the corral fence, watching Thunder and Omen. The bull had created a shaded area for the python by positioning himself to block the afternoon sun, another seemingly deliberate act of care. "What happens if your director gets these permits?" he asked without turning around. Emma joined him at the fence. "Thunder and Omen would be transported to our facility near Austin. They'd be housed together initially, but eventually controlled separation tests would be conducted to measure stress responses and recognition behaviors." "Separation tests," Mason repeated flatly. "After everything we've seen, you'd deliberately separate them to see how they react?" "It's not what I want," Emma insisted. "Science requires—" "Science requires?" Mason turned to face her, anger breaking through his usual reserve. "These aren't lab specimens, Emma. They're living creatures who formed a bond most humans couldn't manage across differences. And you want to stress test that bond in a laboratory?" Emma's professional facade crumbled slightly. "Of course I don't. But my director—" "Hang your director," Jackson interrupted, joining them at the fence. "These animals stayed together because they chose to. Seems to me that choice deserves some respect." A tense silence fell between them, broken only by Thunder's soft lowing as he shifted position beside the python. Emma watched the animals, conflict evident in her expression. "There's something else you should see," Mason said finally, retrieving Lucy's journal from his pocket. He showed Emma the entry again. "Lucy wrote this 3 years ago before she died, before Omen appeared." Emma studied the childish drawing and words with new intensity. How could she have known? "Lucy spent hours with Thunder, said he told her things." Mason shrugged, embarrassed but committed to the truth. "I always thought it was just a child's imagination. But now—" Emma's scientific mind struggled with the implications. "You're suggesting Thunder somehow communicated his past to your niece?" "I'm not suggesting anything, just telling you what happened." Mason put the journal away carefully. "Lucy believed animals understood far more than we give them credit for. After what we've seen these past few days, I'm inclined to think she was right." The emotional appeal seemed to reach Emma in a way logical arguments hadn't. She watched Thunder and Omen for several long moments, her scientific objectivity visibly warring with something more personal. "My entire career has been built on the belief that animal cognition is underestimated by conventional science," she said finally. "I've faced ridicule for suggesting that domestic animals possess emotional intelligence comparable to primates." She turned to Mason. "But what we're witnessing here goes beyond even my most ambitious hypotheses. It's not just intelligence, it's something like compassion, maybe even friendship." "So what will you do?" Jackson asked bluntly. "Stand with your director or with these animals?" Before Emma could answer, Mason's radio crackled to life. "Barrett, you there? This is Chief Wells." Mason stepped away to take the call, his expression growing more concerned as he listened. When he returned, his face was grim. "Peterson's pushed the county meeting to tonight instead of tomorrow. Emergency session at 7 p.m. He checked his watch. "That's less than 3 hours from now." "They're not wasting any time," Jackson observed. "There's more," Mason continued. "Chief says Peterson's office has already drafted an emergency order declaring the python an imminent threat to public safety. If the county commissioners approve it, they can seize Omen immediately, regardless of any research permits or private sanctuary arrangements." Emma paled. "That would be a disaster. Omen is still recovering, and the stress of forcible separation from Thunder could kill him. Then we need to prevent that separation, Mason said with sudden resolve. And I think I know how. He led them to his truck and retrieved a battered laptop from behind the seat. I've been going through the poachers' belongings seized during their arrest. Found something interesting on this computer. He opened a series of files, shipping manifests, veterinary certificates, and transport logs. These guys weren't small-time. They were moving exotic animals all across the southeast. And look at this entry from 3 years ago. The document showed a transport from Everglades Wildlife Management Area to a private buyer in Texas. Among the listed cargo, 1 Brahman bull, captured feral, approx. 1,200 pounds, and 1 Burmese python, male, approx. 16 foot. They were transported together, Emma whispered, scientific skepticism crumbling before documentary evidence. The truck crashed outside Pensacola, Mason continued, showing them a police report. The bull was recovered and eventually sold at auction where Jackson bought him. But the python was listed as escaped, presumed dead. Until he found his way back to Thunder, Jackson finished, wonder creeping into his voice. It's incredible, Emma acknowledged, but how does this help us with Peterson? Because the transport was illegal, Mason explained. These documents prove Thunder was captured illegally from protected land and transported across state lines without proper permits. Technically, he never should have been available for auction. Meaning what? Jackson asked, brow furrowed. Meaning Thunder legally belongs to the federal wildlife authorities, not to you, Mason said. I'm sorry, Jackson. The old rancher absorbed this with surprising calm. And that helps us how, exactly? Mason's expression turned determined. Because if Thunder is evidence in a federal wildlife trafficking case, no county commissioner can authorize separating him from other evidence in the same case, namely, Omen. Emma caught on quickly. You're going to claim they're both federal evidence to prevent Peterson from seizing the python. Exactly. It's a legal technicality that might buy us enough time to find a permanent solution. Mason checked his watch. But I'll need to get these documents to the federal prosecutor immediately to make it official before the county meeting. I'm coming with you, Emma said with sudden determination. My testimony about their bond could strengthen the case. Mason studied her, still uncertain of her loyalties. What about your research director? Your study? Emma's expression hardened. Some things matter more than research papers, Mason. What's happening between these animals is too important to reduce to laboratory observations. She squared her shoulders. I'll deal with my director later. Jackson nodded approvingly. You two go. I'll stay with Thunder and Omen. As they prepared to leave, Emma paused by the corral for one last look at the animals. Thunder had settled on the ground, his massive body curled protectively around Omen's coiled form. The python's head rested on the bull's flank, both animals seemingly at peace despite the human drama swirling around them. You know, Emma said softly, in all my years studying animal behavior, I've never seen anything like their connection. It's as if they understand something we don't, that differences in species and nature and physical form, none of it matters compared to the bond they've formed. Mason followed her gaze, thinking of Lucy and her simple belief in Thunder's goodness. Maybe that's what Lucy saw in him all along. Not just a bull, but a soul capable of friendship that transcends boundaries. As they drove away, racing against time to save an impossible partnership, Mason couldn't help but feel that Thunder and Omen had already achieved something profound. They had forced humans to reconsider what animals could feel, understand, and choose. Whatever happened at the county meeting tonight, that revelation couldn't be undone. In the truck's cab, Emma opened her laptop and began typing rapidly, occasionally referencing the trafficker's documents Mason had discovered. "What are you doing?" Mason asked, navigating the still-flooded country roads. "Writing my resignation letter," Emma replied without looking up, "and documenting everything we've witnessed with Thunder and Omen. If we're going to convince a federal prosecutor to intervene, we'll need more than just trafficking documents." "You'd give up your research position?" Mason was genuinely surprised. "I thought this study was important to your career." Emma paused her typing, staring thoughtfully out the windshield. "When I started in this field, I wanted to prove that animals had greater cognitive abilities than we recognized. I wanted to measure their intelligence, quantify their emotional responses, map their behavioral patterns." A small smile touched her lips. "But Thunder and Omen have shown me something beyond measurement, something science isn't equipped to fully explain." "What's that?" Mason asked. "That maybe the most advanced form of intelligence isn't problem-solving or tool use or even language." Emma turned to him, her eyes bright with conviction. "Maybe it's the capacity to form bonds across boundaries, to recognize another's suffering and respond with compassion regardless of difference." She shook her head in wonder. "If a bull and a python can manage that, what excuse do the rest of us have?" As they raced toward the federal courthouse, the setting sun cast long shadows across the flood-ravaged landscape. Behind them at Whitley Ranch, an elderly rancher kept silent vigil over two creatures whose unlikely friendship had begun to change hearts and minds, a change that would soon spread far beyond the boundaries of a small Texas county. 6 months had transformed Whitley Ranch beyond recognition. The autumn floods that had nearly destroyed it had ironically been its salvation, washing away the old to make room for something entirely new. The Thunder and Omen Wildlife Sanctuary sign at the entrance gate gleamed in the spring sunshine, the fresh paint a testament to its recent establishment. Mason Barrett parked his truck beside the visitor center, once Jackson's barn, now renovated with wide windows and educational displays. He smiled at the small crowd gathered for the morning tour, their eager faces reminding him of Lucy's excitement when visiting Thunder. She would have loved this place. "Right on time," called a familiar voice. Jackson Whitley approached, moving more easily these days with his new hip replacement, the first thing he'd bought after the sanctuary's funding came through. At 81, the old rancher had found an unexpected second act as the sanctuary's honorary director. "Wouldn't miss it," Mason replied, embracing the man who'd become like a father to him. "Today's a big day." Indeed it was. 6 months earlier, they had faced what seemed like insurmountable odds at the county commissioners' meeting. Peterson had arrived with an emergency order and a capture team, certain of his victory. Then Mason and Emma had presented their evidence, the trafficking documents proving Thunder and Omen's shared history, along with Emma's scientific observations of their extraordinary bond. The federal prosecutor, intrigued by the unusual case, had intervened with a temporary protection order. What followed was a legal and bureaucratic battle that might have ended very differently if not for two unexpected developments. First, the video of Thunder carrying Omen through the floodwaters had gone viral, capturing hearts worldwide and turning the animals into international celebrities. Suddenly, public opinion was squarely against separating them. Second, Victor Ramos had surprised everyone by offering a solution that satisfied all parties. He would fund the conversion of Whitley Ranch into a sanctuary for Thunder and Omen, with provisions for research, education, and conservation. Jackson would retain ownership of the land and live there for life, while a non-profit board would manage operations. "Emma's already down at the main enclosure," Jackson said, interrupting Mason's reflections. "Said she wanted to check on Omen before the ceremony." Mason nodded, glancing at his watch. "I'll head down there now. Need to talk to her about the federal grant anyway." He walked the familiar path to what had once been Thunder's simple corral, now expanded into a 5-acre habitat designed specifically for the unlikely pair. The enclosure featured a climate-controlled barn for Omen's comfort during cooler weather, a natural pond, shade trees, and rolling grassland for Thunder. Emma Calloway stood at the observation deck, clipboard in hand, as she made notes. The past 6 months had transformed her as well, from a cautious researcher to a passionate advocate for animal cognition and welfare. Her decision to resign from the Agricultural Research Institute and document Thunder and Omen's relationship had initially threatened her career. Instead, it had made her famous when her preliminary paper on their bond became the most downloaded scientific article of the year. "Morning, Dr. Calloway," Mason called, deliberately formal in front of the interns assisting her. Emma's smile was warm as she turned. "Ranger Barrett, just in time for the morning greeting ritual." Mason joined her at the railing as Thunder and Omen emerged from the barn, moving in their now familiar tandem pattern. The bull, now in his prime at 7 years old, walked with deliberate steps, pausing occasionally for his companion to keep pace. The python, fully recovered and grown to nearly 23 feet, slithered alongside, his movements more fluid and confident than in those early days after his injury. "They still sleep together," Emma observed, her scientific tone belied by the affection in her voice. "Every night, same position. Thunder lies down first, then Omen coils partially on and around him. We've documented it for 183 consecutive nights." Mason watched as the animals approached the observation deck. Thunder lifted his massive head, acknowledging their presence with a soft, lowing sound that never failed to remind Mason of Lucy. Omen raised his head as well, tongue flicking to taste the air. "They recognize us individually now," Emma continued, making a note. "Different reactions to different people. Thunder shows the strongest response to you and Jackson. Omen to you and me." "Makes sense," Mason replied. "We were all there during the flood." That shared experience, the desperate rescue, the revelation of Thunder and Omen's past connection, the fight to keep them together, had bonded the humans as surely as it had cemented the animals' relationship. Mason, Emma, and Jackson had become an unlikely family, united by their determination to protect something remarkable. "Federal grant came through this morning," Mason said, watching Thunder guide Omen toward their favorite sunning spot beneath a live oak. "Full funding for the Cross-Species Cognition Research Center." Emma's eyes widened. "Already? That's 3 months ahead of schedule." "Turns out having the most famous animal duo in America helps cut through red tape," Mason smiled. "Construction can start next month on the South Pasture." The research center had been Emma's vision, a place where scientists could observe and document animal relationships in natural settings, without the artificial constraints of laboratory environments. A Thunder and Omen would remain the flagship example, but the sanctuary was already home to other unusual animal partnerships discovered since its founding. "Speaking of famous," Emma said, nodding toward the parking area where several news vans were arriving, "looks like we'll have plenty of media coverage for the ceremony." Today marked the official opening of the sanctuary to the public, with limited guided tours designed to educate rather than exploit. The ceremony would feature federal wildlife officials, state representatives, and, most significantly, Commissioner Peterson, whose public opposition had gradually transformed into grudging support as the sanctuary's popularity made resistance politically unwise. "Better head back up," Mason suggested. "Jackson will need help with the dignitaries." As they walked, Emma slipped her hand into Mason's, a gesture that still felt new despite the months they'd been together. Their relationship had evolved naturally, from professional respect to friendship, to something deeper, forged in the crucible of their shared battle to protect Thunder and Omen. "I got a letter from my former research director yesterday," Emma said. "He's requesting permission to visit the sanctuary." Mason raised an eyebrow. The same director who wanted to separate Thunder and Omen for laboratory testing? The very same. Emma's tone was more amused than bitter. Apparently, he's had a change of heart after reading my latest paper. Says he wants to reconcile our differing methodological approaches. Translation: your way worked better than his, and now he wants in on the success. Emma laughed. Something like that. I told him he's welcome to visit like any other researcher, but our protocols about animal welfare are non-negotiable. They reached the visitor center just as the first tour group was gathering. Jackson stood on the small podium, looking uncomfortable in his one dress shirt and bolo tie as he prepared to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the authentic Texas drawl that visitors found so charming, "welcome to the Thunder and Omen Wildlife Sanctuary. What you're about to see may challenge everything you thought you knew about animals and their capacity for connection." Mason and Emma slipped into places at the back of the crowd, listening as Jackson recounted the now familiar story of Thunder and Omen's journey, from their capture in Florida to their miraculous reunion, from the flood rescue to the establishment of the sanctuary. "Some folks call what happened between these animals a miracle," Jackson continued. "Scientists like Dr. Calloway here have fancier terms for it. But I'm just an old rancher, and I call it friendship pure and simple, the kind that doesn't care about differences." The crowd murmured appreciatively. Among them, Mason spotted Commissioner Peterson, standing stiffly in an expensive suit, his expression unreadable. Beside him was Victor Ramos, whose financial support and political connections had proven invaluable in establishing the sanctuary. Ramos caught Mason's eye and nodded slightly, a gesture of mutual respect that had gradually replaced their initial distrust. As the ceremony concluded and the first official tour began, Mason found himself drawn back to the main enclosure. The dignitaries and reporters would want statements and photo opportunities with Thunder and Omen, but he wanted a moment alone with them first. The animals were exactly where they'd left them, resting beneath the oak tree. Thunder lay on his side in the dappled shade, while Omen was partially coiled nearby, his scales gleaming in patches of sunlight. As Mason approached, both animals lifted their heads, acknowledging him with what he'd come to recognize as friendly interest. "Big day, you two," he said softly, leaning on the fence. "You're about to become official celebrities." Thunder rose to his feet with the fluid grace that still impressed Mason despite his massive size. The bull approached the fence, followed by Omen, who slithered alongside with equal confidence. They stopped just short of the barrier, regarding Mason with what he could only describe as intelligent awareness. From his pocket, Mason withdrew the small object he'd brought for this moment, a worn hair ribbon that had belonged to Lucy, preserved among her possessions. He held it up, letting the breeze carry its scent. "She would have loved to see this," he told the animals. "To know she was right about you, Thunder. About what animals understand." Thunder extended his muzzle toward the ribbon, nostrils flaring as he took in the scent. Beside him, Omen raised his head higher, tongue flicking rapidly. For a moment, the three of them remained frozen in a tableau of connection, man, bull, and snake, linked by memory and something deeper than words could express. The moment broke as voices approached, the tour group arriving for their first glimpse of the sanctuary's famous residents. Mason tucked the ribbon away and stepped back, resuming his professional demeanor as Emma led the visitors to the observation area. "And here they are," she announced, her voice carrying the perfect blend of scientific authority and genuine wonder. "Thunder and Omen, whose relationship has transformed our understanding of animal cognition and cross-species bonding." The visitors pressed forward eagerly, cameras clicking. Among them, Mason noticed a familiar face, the federal prosecutor whose intervention had been crucial in those early days. The woman caught his eye and gave a small nod of approval at what her legal maneuvering had helped create. Commissioner Peterson stood at the back of the group, arms crossed defensively. When he noticed Mason watching him, he He approached with reluctant steps. "Quite an operation you've built here, Barrett," he acknowledged stiffly. "Not just me," Mason replied. "It took all of us, even those who initially opposed it." Peterson's mouth twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. "Politics makes strange bedfellows. Not as strange as those two, though." He nodded toward Thunder and Omen, who were now performing what Emma called their greeting display for the visitors. Thunder standing tall, while Omen raised his body vertically beside him, creating a striking visual that never failed to impress. "They've changed minds," Mason observed. "Yours included, it seems." Peterson shrugged. "Let's just say I've learned to pick my battles. And to recognize when a fight's already lost." He hesitated, then added grudgingly, "Besides, the sanctuary's bringing good publicity and tourism dollars to the county. Hard to argue with economic benefits." It wasn't a full conversion, but Mason would take it. Peterson moved away to join the other officials, leaving Mason to observe the scene with quiet satisfaction. Later, after the ceremonies concluded and the last visitors departed, Mason, Emma, and Jackson sat on the porch of the old ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sanctuary in hues of gold and amber. In the distance, Thunder and Omen could be seen making their evening rounds of their territory, moving together in the synchronized pattern they'd developed. "Got a call from that wildlife sanctuary in Florida today," Jackson mentioned, sipping his evening bourbon. "They've documented another case, a deer and an alligator sharing territory without aggression. Want to know if Emma will consult." Emma nodded. "I've heard of 3 similar cases since we published our findings. It's as if people are finally looking for cooperation in nature instead of just competition." "Or maybe it was always there," Mason suggested, "and we just didn't have eyes to see it." They fell into comfortable silence. 3 humans whose lives had been transformed by the unlikely friendship between a bull and a python. The sanctuary around them stood as testament to what could happen when people chose to protect rather than separate, to understand rather than fear. As darkness fell, Thunder and Omen made their way back to their barn, silhouetted against the twilight sky, the bull walking with measured steps, the python gliding beside him in perfect harmony. "You know," Jackson said thoughtfully, breaking the silence, "my Martha used to say something that fits what we've seen here. The good Lord sometimes puts the unlikeliest creatures together to teach the rest of us a lesson about love." Emma smiled. "Your wife was a wise woman, Jackson." "That she was." The old rancher nodded toward the animals disappearing into their shelter. "And those 2 are the best teachers I've ever had. Reckon they've taught half of Texas by now." Mason thought of Lucy's journal entry from years ago, her childish certainty that Thunder had a snake friend who might find him someday. Whether through a child's intuition or some deeper connection they might never fully understand, her prophecy had come true in ways none of them could have imagined. "To Thunder and Omen," he said, raising his glass in a toast, "and to seeing the world through new eyes." As their glasses clinked in the gathering darkness, the lights of the sanctuary glowed warm against the Texas night. Inside the specially designed barn, a massive Brahman bull settled onto his bed of straw, and a Burmese python coiled beside him in their nightly ritual of mutual protection and companionship. Their story had begun in the darkness of a trafficking crate, continued through separation and unlikely reunion, and transformed not just their lives, but the lives of everyone who witnessed their bond. In choosing each other despite every natural instinct and human expectation, Thunder and Omen had demonstrated a truth both simple and profound: that connection transcends difference, that compassion knows no species, and that sometimes the most powerful statement is simply refusing to be enemies when the world expects nothing less. Isn't it remarkable how Thunder and Omen's story reminds us that connection can happen in the most unexpected places? In a world that often feels divided, this tale of a bull and python forming an unbreakable bond touches something deep within us. Like many of you who've weathered life's storms, these animals found strength in each other despite their differences. Remember how thunder stood guard over Omen, how they defied nature itself to protect one another. Their friendship flourished not in spite of their differences, but because each recognized something valuable in the other. Just as the most meaningful relationships in our own lives often cross boundaries others might consider impassable. As we grow older, isn't it these connections that matter most? The hands we've held through difficult times, the unlikely friendships that sustained us. Thunder and Omen's story isn't just about animals. It's about the courage to recognize kindred spirits wherever we find them. Has an unexpected friendship changed your life in ways you never anticipated? Or perhaps you've witnessed a connection between others that defied explanation. Share your stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear how unlikely bonds have shaped your journey.